"She looks like a damn Dalmatian," he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. The room erupted in laughter as Marcus, with a smug grin plastered on his face, mocked his wife in front of his colleagues. His words were sharp, cruel, and almost theatrical, as if he were performing in some dark comedy. Yet the laughter that followed his taunt wasn't just for show, it was a cruel reinforcement of his power over her. Imagine hearing such heartless words about yourself from the person you trusted most. How would you respond? Will Wendy crumble under the weight of his betrayal, or will she rise to take control of her destiny? What do you think will happen next? Let us know where you're tuning in from and see if your prediction holds. Wendy had always known she was different. From the moment she opened her eyes to the world, she realized her skin wasn't quite like the others. The deep brown of her complexion was interrupted by patches of pale, milky white. These spots weren't like freckles or birthmarks. They were a constant reminder that something in her body wasn't quite right. As a child, she couldn't fully grasp what it meant to have vitiligo, but she knew it made her feel separate from the other children at school, and often that separation felt like a heavy cloak draped over her shoulders. Her classmates' stares, whispers, and laughter cut deeper than any words she could ever express. Yet in the silence, Wendy found herself retreating into herself, her self-esteem slowly crumbling with each passing day. Her mother, however, had always been her anchor, the one person who made Wendy feel seen and beautiful, even when the world seemed determined to show her otherwise. "Your skin, my darling, is like a canvas," her mother would say, gently running her fingers across the patches of white, as though the very imperfections were something to be proud of. Each mark tells a story of strength and resilience, and only you can tell it. Wendy's mother, a woman of deep wisdom and love, would remind her of the beauty she carried within. But no matter how many times those words were spoken, Wendy's reflection in the mirror never seemed to align with the image her mother so lovingly painted. At school, she tried to keep to herself, finding comfort in the quiet corners of classrooms and the solitude of her room at home. The teasing was relentless. "Why does your skin look like that?" a girl named Chloe asked one day, her voice dripping with curiosity and mockery. Wendy, who had grown accustomed to questions like these, simply looked down at her shoes, her face flushed with embarrassment. She wanted to respond, to tell them that she was still the same person, that the color of her skin didn't define her, but the words caught in her throat every time. Instead, she would retreat further into the shadows, hiding her face beneath a hat or scarf, hoping that if she were just invisible enough, the teasing would stop. But it never did. Her mother's words echoed in her mind whenever she felt the sting of those moments, reminding her that the world didn't define her. Only she could do that. Still, the battle between what her mother said and what the world made her feel was exhausting, and Wendy often found herself torn between the comfort of her mother's unconditional love and the harsh reality of being so visibly different. In the evenings after the world had quieted and the whispers at school had faded, Wendy would sit by the window in her bedroom, gazing out at the moon. The silver light would reflect on her skin, and for a fleeting moment, she would feel at peace. The moon, she thought, had imperfections too, dark spots and shadows that marred its surface, yet it still shone brightly in the night sky. Maybe, just maybe, she could be like the moon, beautiful, despite the flaws. Her mother never stopped reminding her of her strength. "You are a warrior, Wendy," she would say, her voice soft but firm. "Those who don't see your worth are blind. Don't let them define you." It was a lesson Wendy learned all too well. Still, the words were not enough to quiet the doubts that plagued her. As Wendy grew older, the vitiligo became more pronounced. The patches spread across her arms, down her neck, and across her face. The changes to her appearance were subtle but undeniable, and with each passing year, the weight of being different grew heavier. There were days when she wanted to hide under the covers, away from the world, away from the stares. But her mother always encouraged her to rise above it, to wear her uniqueness like a badge of honor. "The world will eventually see you for who you truly are, not what you look like," she would say with unwavering confidence. But Wendy wasn't sure when or if that day would ever come. One day, as Wendy walked home from school, a group of boys called out to her. They were laughing, making fun of the way her skin looked. "Hey, look at the Dalmatian," one of them jeered, his voice dripping with amusement. Wendy's heart sank. The laughter echoed in her ears, louder than the beating of her own heart. She tried to walk faster, hoping they would leave her alone, but they followed her, taunting her with each step. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, but the words once again caught in her throat, replaced by the familiar ache of humiliation. That night, after a long, quiet dinner, her mother sat beside her on the bed. "I know it's hard, darling," she said, her voice soft, "but don't let them win. They don't know you like I do. They can't see the beauty inside you, but I do." Wendy looked into her mother's eyes, feeling the warmth and sincerity in her words. Her mother's love was unwavering, but Wendy felt lost, unsure of how to navigate the world that seemed so determined to make her feel less than. In the solitude of her room, Wendy gazed at her reflection. She no longer tried to hide the patches of pale skin, but instead let her eyes linger on them, studying the way the light played across the spots. For the first time in years, she didn't feel repulsed. Maybe, just maybe, her mother was right. Maybe she didn't need to be like everyone else to be beautiful. But as the days went on, Wendy still faced the harsh realities of being different. The laughter, the stares, the whispered comments never stopped. Yet with each passing day, something inside her shifted. She began to understand that her mother's love wasn't just about seeing the beauty in her physical appearance. It was about recognizing the strength and courage it took to face a world that didn't always accept her. Wendy wasn't just her skin, she was her spirit, her heart, and her resilience. And though it would take years for Wendy to fully accept herself, that moment by the mirror was the first step on a long journey, one that would eventually lead her to discover that true beauty didn't lie in perfection, but in the way she carried herself, despite all the imperfections the world so eagerly pointed out. When Wendy first met Aaron, she didn't know it would change her life. He was the new guy in college, a striking figure with dark, penetrating eyes and a confident smile that seemed to light up every room he entered. She hadn't given much thought to the attention he gave her at first. After all, why would someone like him, handsome, charming, and effortlessly charismatic, take an interest in someone like her? She was just Wendy, the girl with the unusual skin, the one who kept her head down to avoid unwanted gazes. But Aaron, with his silver-tongued words and seemingly genuine compliments, made her feel seen for the first time. "I think you're beautiful, Wendy," he said one afternoon, his voice smooth and sincere. Wendy was taken aback. No one had ever said anything like that to her, certainly not in the way Aaron did. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he looked at her, as if she were the only person in the room. For a brief moment, she forgot about the vitiligo that had always made her feel out of place. He wasn't staring at her patches of pale skin. He was looking into her eyes as if he saw something in her no one else did. She felt warmth flood her chest, a warmth she hadn't experienced in years, and for the first time, she let herself believe him. Maybe Aaron could be the one to show her the kind of love her mother had always talked about, the kind of love that saw beyond imperfections. As weeks passed, Aaron's attention never wavered. He'd text her sweet messages, take her out for walks around campus, and listen to her, really listen, as if her words mattered more than anything else in the world. Wendy began to feel like she was finally living in a dream where she didn't have to hide, where her beauty wasn't measured by the color of her skin. Aaron made her feel like the most special person on earth, and she couldn't help but fall for him. His charm was irresistible, and his persistence, his constant reassuring that he loved her just the way she was a comfort she never knew she needed. One evening, under the soft glow of the campus lights, Aaron took her hand in his and led her to a quiet spot by the fountain. He looked at her with a mixture of admiration and affection, as if she were the most precious thing he had ever laid eyes on. "Wendy, you are everything I've ever wanted," he said, his voice full of conviction. "I love you. Your heart, your soul, your strength. You're perfect in ways that I can't even explain." Wendy's heart skipped a beat. Those words, so simple yet so powerful, meant everything to her. He saw her. He saw her. It was as though the years of feeling invisible, the years of hiding behind her skin, had melted away. All she could do was smile, her eyes shining with unspoken gratitude. "I love you too, Aaron," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but full of truth. Their relationship blossomed in the months that followed. Aaron would take her out on weekends, introducing her to his friends, showing her off like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Wendy couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so accepted, so loved. Aaron made her feel like she belonged. Every touch, every kiss, every word from him made her heart soar. She was no longer the girl who hid in the shadows. She was Wendy, the girl who had found love in the most unexpected place, and for the first time in her life, she felt beautiful. Not because of what others saw, but because Aaron made her believe in herself. But even in the warmth of his affection, a small part of Wendy couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't that Aaron had given her any reason to doubt him, but there were moments, small, fleeting moments, where she caught him looking at her in a way that made her uncomfortable. His gaze would linger a little too long on her skin, and she would feel a pang of self-consciousness. Still, she dismissed it as her insecurities taking hold. Aaron loved her, didn't he? He told her every day. She was the different one, not him. So she pushed the doubts aside and allowed herself to enjoy the happiness she had found in his arms. One night, as they lay together on a blanket in a quiet corner of the campus park, Aaron turned to her with a mischievous glint in his eye. "Wendy," he said softly, "I think you're the most unique woman I've ever met." Wendy's heart fluttered. Unique was a word she had never heard in such a positive light before, especially not about her skin. He was looking at her with an intensity she had never seen before. "I love every part of you," he continued, "even the parts that make you different. You know that, right?" Wendy smiled, touched by his words, but there was a nagging feeling in the back of her mind that she couldn't shake. Was it possible that Aaron wasn't just seeing her, but seeing the potential of something else? Something deeper, something more selfish? Weeks passed, and Wendy couldn't ignore the whispers in her head any longer. There were moments when Aaron seemed too eager to talk about her family's wealth, about her father's successful business, about what she could bring to the table. But Wendy dismissed it all, convincing herself that she was just being paranoid. Aaron loved her, she told herself. That was all that mattered. He wasn't like the others who mocked her for her appearance. He was different. Then came the day when Aaron proposed. It wasn't extravagant or grandiose. It was simple, just the two of them sitting by the same fountain where they had first confessed their love. "Wendy," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Wendy's heart raced as she stared at the ring in his hand. She didn't even hesitate. "Yes," she whispered, the word escaping her lips before she could even think about it. She was ready to be his, to build a life together, to finally have a place where she belonged. Little did she know this was only the beginning of a journey that would change everything. What seemed like the happiest day of her life would soon unravel the very fabric of the love she thought she understood. But for now, Wendy was lost in the bliss of first love, unaware of the storm that was brewing just beyond the horizon. Wendy had never imagined that the man she loved so deeply, the one who had made her feel beautiful in a world that had never quite accepted her, could be the one to shatter her sense of self. It all began subtly at first, with little comments that should have meant nothing, but as time passed, they began to build into something much darker. It wasn't the words themselves that alarmed her. It was the way Aaron spoke about her, as if she was not just his fiancée, but also a symbol of something far more complicated. His constant reminders of how unique she was made her feel special, but there was always a tone to his voice, a hint of something less innocent, that made her wonder if his admiration was entirely genuine. One evening, they attended a party with Aaron's friends, a group of people she had come to know and like, but something was off. She had noticed that whenever they talked about her, the conversation always veered toward her skin. "You know," one of Aaron's friends, Dave, said with a laugh, "Wendy's skin is one of a kind. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it." Wendy smiled politely, trying to ignore the feeling of discomfort creeping up her spine. But it wasn't just Dave's comment that bothered her. It was Aaron's reaction. He laughed along, and then, when their eyes met, he gave her a look she couldn't quite place. It was almost like a smile, but there was something cruel about it, as if she were an object of amusement rather than someone he truly loved. The following weeks brought more of these uncomfortable moments, subtle shifts in Aaron's behavior that left Wendy feeling off balance. At dinner with Aaron and a few of his colleagues, she overheard a conversation that would haunt her for days. They were discussing a recent charity event her family had sponsored, and Aaron's voice, as he spoke to his colleagues, had an edge to it that Wendy had never heard before. "You know, I told Wendy she should be more careful about how she dresses," he said, a slight chuckle in his voice. "She needs to embrace the uniqueness of her skin. It's part of her charm, I guess. But sometimes it's hard to know how to make that look work." Wendy's heart sank as she forced a smile, her stomach twisting in a knot. She had never realized that Aaron's affection for her could be so conditional, that her appearance was something to be managed, controlled, and fixed. She had always known that the world saw her differently because of her vitiligo, but to hear Aaron speak about it like a project that needed improvement was a bitter pill to swallow. Was he still in love with her, or was he simply in love with the idea of her, the exotic flaw that set her apart? The next evening, as they sat on the couch together, Wendy couldn't hold her thoughts in any longer. She turned to Aaron, searching his eyes for some sign of the man who had once made her feel so special. "Aaron," she began, her voice tentative but firm, "do you still love me the way you used to? I mean, do you love me, or is it just my skin, my differences, that you love?" Aaron looked at her with a blank expression, as though the question hadn't even occurred to him. He leaned back against the couch, a faint smile playing on his lips, as if he were humoring her. "What do you mean?" he asked, clearly pretending not to understand. "Of course I love you. What's not to love?" His response didn't reassure her. It only deepened the growing doubt that had been festering in her heart. "I don't know, Aaron," Wendy continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Lately, it feels like you're more interested in how I look than who I am. I feel like I'm not enough for you, that maybe you're just putting up with me because I'm some kind of rare specimen." For a moment, Aaron was silent, and Wendy watched him, waiting for him to say something that would calm her fears. But instead of the reassurance she hoped for, he simply shrugged. "Well, you're right in a way," he said, his tone casual, almost dismissive. "People notice you, Wendy. You stand out. That's a good thing. I mean, it's part of why I'm with you, isn't it? You're unique. You don't blend in with the crowd. I like that about you." The words hit Wendy like a slap. She felt the weight of them pressed down on her chest, as though her worst fears were being confirmed. Aaron didn't love her for who she was. He loved the spectacle she created, the attention she drew. He loved the fact that she was different, but that difference didn't seem to be something he cherished. It was something he could control, something he could manipulate for his gain. A few days later, everything came crashing down. At a charity gala that Aaron had been so eager to attend, Wendy overheard a conversation she could never have imagined in her worst nightmares. Standing near the bar with a group of Aaron's colleagues, Wendy heard Aaron's voice cutting through the chatter. "Yeah, I don't know what she's thinking," he was saying, his tone dripping with disdain. "I told her to stay home tonight, but you know her. She insists on coming to these things even though she doesn't fit in. She looks like a damn Dalmatian, and honestly, it's just embarrassing. Who would want to be seen with that at an event like this?" Wendy's heart shattered as the words hit her, as the truth about Aaron's feelings for her finally came to light. It wasn't about love, it was about control. It wasn't about her beauty or her worth. It was about how she made him look. She stood frozen in place, her chest tightening as the weight of betrayal settled over her like a dark cloud. She turned on her heel, ready to leave, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from Aaron. He was laughing, surrounded by his colleagues, as if nothing was wrong, as if he hadn't just crushed her soul with his cruel words. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Instead, Wendy walked out of the gala, her mind racing. It was over. The man she had trusted, the man she had loved, had shown her who he was. There was no going back. She had never felt more alone in her life. As she drove home that night, her mind replaying the conversation over and over again, Wendy knew something had to change. She couldn't keep living in this lie, in a relationship that only existed because of her differences. She wasn't just Wendy anymore. She was a commodity, a trophy to be admired, not loved. She couldn't be with someone who only saw her as a prize to be flaunted for his benefit. She was done. But what did this mean for her future? Could she ever truly love herself, knowing that the person she trusted most had betrayed her in the most intimate way possible? Only time would tell, but one thing was clear. Wendy was no longer the same woman who had walked into that relationship. She was stronger now, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next. The night after the gala was the quietest Wendy had ever known. It wasn't the peaceful silence that came with the calm of solitude. It was suffocating, like being trapped in a room with no air. Her mind raced as she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the phone in her hand. The messages from Aaron, filled with his usual sweetness, seemed like cruel taunts now. She couldn't bring herself to answer, not when she felt like the woman he had promised to love had been replaced by someone unrecognizable. "You look perfect tonight, Wendy," his text had said just before she overheard him mocking her. "You make me proud." She scoffed, tossing her phone aside. He didn't make her feel proud. He had made her feel small, like an accessory he could discard whenever it suited him. Clara, her best friend, and the only person who had ever truly seen her, called just as Wendy began to sink into the weight of her emotions. "Wendy, I know you're hurting, but you can't let him get away with this. You're worth so much more than this. You don't need him." Wendy's hand tightened around the phone as Clara's words sank in. She had always been there for Wendy, always stood by her, and now she was telling her to stop being weak, to rise above this. The fire that had once burned so brightly in Wendy, the girl who had fought through all the adversity of her childhood, was now beginning to stir again. Clara didn't just see the woman Wendy was. She saw the woman she could be. The following days were filled with a mixture of numbness and anger. Wendy could barely look at Aaron's texts or his calls without feeling sick to her stomach. Her reflection in the mirror no longer held the same woman who had been so eager to marry him. Instead, she saw someone stronger, someone who had been awakened. She spent hours at the gym, working through her anger, pushing herself harder than ever before. It wasn't just her body that she wanted to change. It was her mindset. She was tired of being the victim of someone else's cruelty. Tired of letting her worth be determined by someone who could only love her for what he thought was special about her. On the third day after the gala, Wendy did something she hadn't even thought possible. She packed a bag, one filled with clothes, toiletries, and a few important documents. She wasn't leaving to return. She was leaving to reclaim herself. Wendy had decided that this toxic relationship had taken too much from her, and it was time to take it all back. She drove to her mother's house, the one place where she always found solace and strength. Her mother was surprised but understanding when Wendy told her everything. "I always knew he wasn't the one," her mother said, holding Wendy's hands in hers. "You're stronger than this, Wendy. You always have been." For the first time in weeks, Wendy felt like she could breathe again. Her mother's support was the last piece of reassurance she needed to make a firm decision. She wasn't going to let Aaron have power over her anymore. He didn't define her, and he certainly didn't deserve her. Wendy wasn't just going to leave him physically. She was going to leave him emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. A few days later, Clara took Wendy to an event she had been invited to. A gala for a nonprofit that helped underprivileged children get access to education. Wendy had once dreamed of starting her foundation, but that dream had gotten lost in the web of her relationship with Aaron. Now the fire to help others, to rise above, began to flicker in her heart again. Clara knew exactly what Wendy needed: a public return, a statement of strength. When Wendy walked into the ballroom, she felt the eyes of the room on her. The whispers started immediately, but this time, she didn't shrink. She wasn't the girl who had been mocked or put down. No, she was the woman who had fought to find herself again. The woman who had found the strength to walk away from a man who only saw her for her imperfections. Wendy, with her radiant crimson gown, stood tall, her natural curls framing her face like a crown. She was no longer the woman Aaron had tried to mold. She was Wendy, fully realized, and proud of every imperfection, every scar. Clara, standing by her side, noticed the shift immediately. "You look amazing, Wendy. The world has no idea what's about to hit them." Wendy gave her a small, knowing smile. She didn't need Aaron's approval anymore, nor did she need anyone else's for that matter. She was enough. The event was a blur of people, speeches, and performances, but Wendy's presence commanded the room in a way she had never experienced before. There was no hesitation in her movements, no second guessing. She was confident, calm, and in control. She was no longer the girl who hid away, afraid of judgment. As the night wore on, Wendy felt a shift in the air, a sense of power that she had never thought possible. Her eyes met the gaze of a man across the room, Peter, her friend from college, the one who had always been there for her, even when Aaron wasn't. His eyes lingered on her for a moment, and Wendy could see the respect and admiration in them. It was as if he saw the woman she had become, not just the woman who had been betrayed. He smiled at her, and in that moment, she knew everything had changed. Peter approached her, breaking through the crowd, his presence quiet but firm. "Wendy," he said, his voice steady, "you've come a long way. I'm proud of you." His words weren't just kind, they were genuine. It wasn't about her appearance, her skin, or her past. It was about who she had become. Wendy felt something shift inside of her. This wasn't just a return to the world. This was a declaration of independence. She had done this on her own, and she had found a strength she never knew she had. As the evening drew to a close, Wendy stood in the center of the ballroom, a smile on her face, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. The woman who had once cowered in the face of cruelty, the woman who had believed she was too broken to be loved, was now standing tall. The room had watched as she walked into her new life, and though some still whispered, she knew they could never define her again. Her phone buzzed in her bag, and she glanced at it. It was a message from Aaron. She read it with a cold, steady resolve. "Why are you doing this, Wendy? We were meant to be together." She smiled to herself, the answer clear in her heart. She wasn't meant to be with him. She was meant to be with herself, and that was more than enough. Wendy wasn't just walking away from a broken relationship. She was stepping into a future she would build on her terms. She had taken back her power, and nothing, not even Aaron's empty promises, could take that away. She was no longer a shadow of someone else's expectations. She was finally free. The decision had been made, and Wendy could feel the weight of it pressing down on her with each passing moment. Leaving Aaron had been a choice made out of necessity, not anger, but the anger soon found its way to the surface. For too long, she had lived in a suffocating silence, believing that the man she loved could change, believing that he would one day see her for who she truly was. But now she saw the truth with unblinking clarity. He never had and never would. Wendy wasn't sure when her feelings had shifted from love to indifference, but as she stood in front of her reflection that morning, the woman staring back at her was resolute. It was time to break free. Aaron had texted her the night before, asking if they could talk. His words were polite, almost pleading, but there was a coldness to them that made her stomach churn. "Wendy, I miss you. We need to figure this out. You don't have to do this. Please, let's talk." The same words he had used countless times to manipulate her into staying in a relationship that drained her, that slowly chipped away at her sense of worth. Now, as Wendy read his message, she realized that the person she had once fought for, the person she had tried to save, was long gone. What remained was a man who had never truly loved her, a man who had used her to build his self-esteem, to inflate his fragile ego. She wasn't going to let him do it anymore. Wendy grabbed her phone and typed back, her fingers trembling slightly, but her resolve firm. "I'm done, Aaron. We're done. You've shown me who you are, and I can't ignore it anymore. I don't need you, and I certainly don't want to be with someone who can't see me for who I am. I'm not your trophy, and I'm not your project." She hesitated for a moment, then added one final line. "You've broken me enough. I'm not going to let you break me anymore." With a deep breath, she hit send and set the phone down. The next few hours felt like a blur. Wendy went through the motions of her day, getting dressed, going to the office. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental had just occurred. She wasn't just leaving Aaron physically, she was severing the emotional and mental chains that had bound her for so long. It was freedom, but it was also terrifying. She had no idea what came next. The only thing she knew for certain was that she could no longer stay in the life she had built with him. At the end of the day, Aaron called her again. She could hear the anger in his voice when she answered. "What the hell do you mean we're done, Wendy?" His words were sharp, accusing, like a man desperate to regain control of a situation that was slipping through his fingers. "You don't just walk away from everything we built. You owe me this." Wendy's heart pounded, but she stood tall, her back straight, even though he couldn't see her. She knew this conversation wouldn't go the way he wanted it to, and she wasn't about to let him manipulate her into feeling guilty anymore. "No, Aaron, I owe you nothing," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I don't owe you my time, my love, or my life. You've taken enough from me already. I can't keep living like this, pretending everything is fine when it's not. I don't want to be with you anymore." The line went silent for a long moment, and Wendy almost thought the call had dropped. But then Aaron spoke, his voice now cold, tinged with a bitterness that sent a chill down her spine. "You think you're the first woman to ever leave me, Wendy? You think I can't find someone better than you? Someone who will appreciate me?" His words were meant to wound, but Wendy could hear the desperation beneath them. He wasn't angry at her. He was angry that he no longer had control over her. He was losing the hold he had on her, and it terrified him. "You don't get to define me anymore, Aaron," Wendy said, her voice a quiet strength. "You've tried to break me, to make me feel small, but I'm not that woman anymore. I'm not your project. I'm not your trophy. I'm me, and I'm walking away." The conversation ended with a cold click, and as soon as the line went dead, Wendy felt the weight she hadn't realized she was carrying begin to lift. She stood in the middle of the room, her heart pounding, but her chest lighter than it had been in years. She had taken control of her life for the first time, and though it terrified her, she knew it was the only way forward. The next morning, Wendy packed her things, the last remnants of a life she had outgrown, into her car. She didn't take much, just a few clothes, her phone, and the essentials. But it was enough. As she walked through the house one last time, her eyes lingered on the things that had once felt like home. The photos of them together, the mementos from trips they'd taken, the rings that now felt like chains. It all seemed so distant, so foreign now. She had given so much of herself to him, had tried so hard to make him love her, to make him see her, but in the end, she had lost herself in the process. No more. She wasn't going to allow him to take any more of her. Aaron didn't fight her on the divorce. He didn't need to. He had already made his feelings clear in the cruel words he had thrown at her. But it wasn't about him anymore. It was about her, about reclaiming the parts of herself she had buried for so long. Wendy filed for divorce that same day. She didn't want anything from him. No alimony, no assets. She simply wanted freedom, and she wasn't about to let anyone stand in her way. The divorce was finalized in record time, a mere formality after everything that had happened. Wendy signed the papers, handed them to her lawyer, and left the courthouse with a sense of finality she had never known before. She was free. She was no longer bound by the past, by the man who had tried to reshape her into something she wasn't. She was Wendy, fully realized, and the world was hers to take. As she drove away from the courthouse, her phone buzzed again. It was Aaron. A part of her wanted to ignore it, but she couldn't help herself. She glanced at the screen. "You'll regret this, Wendy. No one will love you like I did." Wendy smiled to herself, a small, knowing smile. She didn't need Aaron's love. She had her own now, and it was more than enough. She hit delete, and for the first time in years, she felt completely free. Wendy stood at the edge of the balcony, staring out over the city below, feeling the cool breeze on her face as the sun dipped beneath the horizon. The colors of the sky, purples, pinks, and oranges, reminded her of the possibilities that lay ahead. A few months ago, she wouldn't have dared to imagine a future without Aaron, but now, as she stood alone in the quiet of her apartment, she realized that she had built this life for herself, from the ground up. It hadn't been easy. Nothing about walking away from the man she thought she would spend her life with had been easy, but it had been necessary, and now for the first time in years, she felt whole again. She had found her strength, the part of her that had been buried beneath the weight of betrayal, self-doubt, and insecurity. After the divorce was finalized, Wendy had taken time to reflect and heal. She had spent long hours walking, thinking, and simply allowing herself the grace to be. But soon as the healing began, so did the hunger for something more. She wasn't the kind of woman who could remain idle for long. She had always dreamed of doing something impactful, something that would define her on her terms, and now she was determined to make those dreams a reality. The first step was her career. Wendy had always worked in the family business, helping her father with logistics, but it had never been her passion. She had wanted to make a difference in the world, to help those who couldn't help themselves, and she knew now was the time to pursue that dream. Clara was there, of course, offering her unwavering support. "You have the power to make a difference, Wendy," Clara told her one afternoon as they sat in a small cafe near Wendy's apartment. "You've already done the hardest part, breaking free from what was holding you back. Now it's time to take that next step and build something for yourself." Wendy felt the truth in her friend's words. She wasn't a woman bound by the past anymore. She was a woman on the cusp of something great. With Clara's encouragement, Wendy reached out to a few nonprofit organizations she admired, offering her expertise in management and logistics. At first, her calls were met with polite interest but little commitment. But Wendy didn't let that discourage her. She continued to push forward, refining her pitch and strengthening her resolve. And then one afternoon, her phone rang, and everything changed. A renowned educational foundation that focused on global access to education was interested in speaking with her. They had seen her work with her father's business and were impressed by her strategic thinking. The call was just the beginning, and soon Wendy found herself in meetings with influential leaders, speaking about the potential impact she could have on children's education in underprivileged areas. The opportunity felt like a gift, a chance to make the kind of difference she had always wanted. The foundation offered her a position as their new director of outreach and development, a role that would allow her to take the reins in helping to shape the organization's future. It was everything Wendy had worked for, everything she had dreamed of in her quiet moments of reflection, and it was hers. She signed the contract that same week, knowing that this was the beginning of her true journey. But with this success came new challenges. Wendy wasn't just stepping into a new role. She was stepping into a world that was full of powerful figures, sharp minds, and expectations that could either elevate her or crush her. At first, it felt overwhelming. The pressure to prove herself, to show that she was more than just the woman who had left her husband, was intense. She spent long nights working, meetings that stretched into the early morning, and calls that never seemed to end. There were times when she doubted herself, when the weight of the responsibility felt too heavy to bear. But through it all, Wendy kept reminding herself why she had taken this step. She had done it for herself, for the woman she wanted to become, and for the future she was determined to build. One afternoon, as she sat at her desk, reviewing a proposal for a new educational program, she received an unexpected call from her old colleague, Peter. They had kept in touch casually over the past few months, but they had never spoken in depth. "Wendy," Peter's voice came through the line, steady but full of warmth. "I've been following your work with the foundation. I just wanted to say that I'm proud of you. You've done something incredible." Her heart fluttered at the sound of his voice. Peter had always been a quiet presence in her life, someone she respected deeply, but had never truly seen in a romantic light. But hearing him acknowledge her success, the very success that had been so hard-won, made her feel something shift inside. "Thank you, Peter," Wendy replied, her voice tinged with a humility she hadn't known she possessed. "It's been a lot of work, but I'm starting to feel like I'm on the right path." Their conversation continued for a while, and by the end, Peter had offered to meet her for coffee. Wendy agreed, curious to see where the conversation would lead. When they met a few days later, Wendy was surprised to find that the connection between them had deepened. There was a warmth in Peter's eyes, a genuine admiration for everything she had accomplished. As they spoke, Wendy realized that the person she had once been, broken, unsure of her worth, was nowhere to be found. The woman sitting across from Peter was strong, proud, and more than capable of navigating whatever came next. As the weeks passed, Wendy's confidence continued to grow. She threw herself into her work, planning new outreach initiatives, working with schools and underserved communities, and forging partnerships with organizations that shared her vision for education. She had found her calling, and the more she immersed herself in the work, the more she felt like she was fulfilling her purpose. One night, as she stood before a room full of donors at a gala hosted by the foundation, Wendy couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. She had done this. She had built this life from the ground up, and she had done it on her terms. As the applause echoed in the ballroom, Wendy's gaze shifted toward Peter, who was standing off to the side, watching her with a look of admiration. She smiled at him, and in that moment, she knew that while her journey wasn't over, she had already won. She had found herself again, and no one, especially not Aaron, could take that away from her. Wendy had rebuilt her life, stronger and more determined than ever, and the world was beginning to see her for the powerful woman she had always been. The road ahead was full of challenges, but for the first time in her life, she knew that she was more than capable of handling whatever came her way. She was no longer the girl who had been broken by betrayal. She was the woman who had risen from the ashes, stronger and more resilient than ever before. And nothing could stand in her way. Wendy had never expected to find herself here, sitting in a cozy little cafe, smiling as she sipped her coffee across from Peter. The warmth of the mug in her hand seemed to match the comfort she felt in his presence, and it was a comfort she hadn't known she needed until now. As they spoke about their work, their lives, and the challenges they had faced over the past months, Wendy realized that the connection she had once felt for Peter was no longer just a quiet, supportive friendship. It was something more, something deeper. For the first time in a long while, she let herself acknowledge the feelings she had been suppressing. Peter had been a steady force in her life, someone who had always believed in her, and now as she looked at him across the table, she could see the admiration in his eyes, but more importantly, there was something new: desire. It wasn't just that Peter had been a friend. He had been there for her when she was at her lowest, when she couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. He had never pushed her, never expected more than what she could give, and that kind of patience, that kind of understanding was rare. Wendy knew that he had seen her at her weakest, and yet here he was, looking at her with a softness that made her heart race. The way he spoke to her, the way his eyes lingered just a bit longer than necessary, made her wonder if he had always felt this way, or if this was something new that had emerged as they both began to heal. The more they talked, the more Wendy realized how much she had missed being cared for in this way, in a way that was free from judgment, free from expectations. Aaron's love had been so conditional, so wrapped up in his own need for control and validation. With Peter, it was different. It was easy, it was light, and it was real. Wendy didn't have to explain herself. He understood her without needing her to justify every choice, every decision she made. It wasn't about her past or the mistakes she had made. It was about who she was now, the woman who had rebuilt her life and found her strength. As they continued their conversation, Wendy couldn't help but notice how Peter's gaze softened every time she smiled or laughed. His voice, once reserved, had grown warmer, more confident, and she could sense that he was no longer hiding his own feelings. Wendy was taken aback by the sudden rush of emotion that flooded her chest. Was it possible that Peter, the man who had been nothing but a steady friend for so long, was now the man who could show her what it meant to love again? Her thoughts were racing, and for the first time since she had walked away from Aaron, she felt a spark of hope. Later that evening, after they finished their coffee, Peter suggested a walk through the nearby park. Wendy agreed, though she had no idea why it felt so right to walk beside him, their steps falling into sync. As they strolled through the quiet park, the air cool against their skin, Wendy's heart fluttered in a way that felt unfamiliar. It wasn't just the newness of the situation, it was the realization that she was allowing herself to feel again, to trust again. She had been so careful, so guarded for so long, afraid of the pain that could come from opening her heart. But with Peter, it felt different. It didn't feel like a risk. It felt like something she had been waiting for. "I've been thinking," Peter said, his voice breaking the comfortable silence between them, "about how long I've known you and how proud I am of everything you've accomplished." Wendy turned to look at him, surprised by the sincerity in his words. "You've done the hard work, Wendy. You've built a life from scratch. You've come so far, and I'm honored to be part of your journey." Wendy's heart swelled with emotion, and she found herself stopping in the middle of the path, needing to steady herself. "Peter," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I don't know what to say. I never expected any of this. This connection, this feeling." Peter stopped too, turning to face her, his expression soft, vulnerable. "You don't need to say anything, Wendy," he said, stepping closer. "I'm not asking you to. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Not unless you want me to." In that moment, the weight of everything she had been through, everything she had fought for, seemed to dissolve. She realized for the first time that she didn't have to face it alone. She could let someone in, someone who wanted to see her succeed, not for their own gain, but for her happiness. And with that thought, she reached out, taking his hand in hers. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes, an unspoken promise that she was willing to trust again, to believe in love again, even if it scared her. As they continued their walk hand in hand, Wendy felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in years. There was no fear of judgment, no fear of being hurt, just the comfort of knowing that she was no longer alone. Peter had been there for her during her darkest days, but now he was here, walking beside her as she began a new chapter in her life. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she was certain of one thing. With Peter by her side, she was no longer the woman she had been. She was someone new, someone strong, and someone ready to embrace the love that was finally being offered to her without conditions, without expectations. As the night wore on, and the city lights shimmered in the distance, Wendy found herself leaning into Peter, resting her head on his shoulder as they walked. There was no rush, no urgency, just the quiet comfort of two people who had found something special in each other. For the first time in a long time, Wendy felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. And it was with Peter in this moment, on this path they were now walking together. The past had shaped her, but it would not define her future. That was hers to create. And with Peter beside her, she was ready to build something beautiful, something lasting, a love that wasn't built on the ashes of the past, but on the foundation of trust, respect, and a deep, unwavering connection. Wendy had hoped that walking away from Aaron would mark the end of her struggles, but as she settled into her new life, she soon realized that some battles couldn't be won so easily. It started with small things, odd messages from unknown numbers, a sudden mention of her name in meetings at work where she wasn't involved, and then a whisper of rumors that made her blood run cold. It wasn't just the whispers of Aaron's friends, it was the subtle undercurrent of something darker, something that didn't want her to succeed, something that wanted to remind her that the past was never truly gone. Aaron had let her go, but in his mind she was never going to get away so easily. It wasn't long before Wendy began receiving strange emails, anonymous, threatening, vague, yet unmistakably linked to her ex-husband. They spoke of her being unworthy of success, of trying to take what wasn't hers, of ruining the future of the business her family had built. It felt as though Aaron was still lurking in the shadows, his reach still wide enough to make her feel unsafe, to remind her that the power he once had over her was something he would never relinquish. The first email was easy to dismiss. She'd been through worse with him. The second, though, felt different. It wasn't just an empty threat, it was a warning. Aaron's words, though indirect, were sharp and venomous, and they sent a shiver down Wendy's spine. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Peter noticed the change in her almost immediately. Wendy had been distant, quieter than usual, as though she were carrying a burden that she couldn't share. He noticed the way her eyes would flicker with unease when they walked past certain places or when her phone buzzed. But whenever he asked, she brushed it off, saying it was just work or something trivial. Peter knew better than to push her too hard, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. He had seen Wendy fight too hard, too long, to let someone, especially Aaron, drag her back into the darkness. One evening after they had finished dinner, Wendy sat with Peter in the living room, her hands shaking as she poured herself a glass of wine. "It's not over," she said. her voice low, barely above a whisper, as though admitting it aloud would make it too real. Peter turned to her, concern written on his face as he set his glass down. "What do you mean? What's not over?" Wendy took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the room as though she were making sure they were alone, that no one was listening. "Aaron," she said finally, her voice barely audible, "he's still trying to control me. He's still trying to make my life hell. I thought it was done when I left him, but it's not. He won't let me go." Peter didn't hesitate. He reached for her hand, his grip firm, his eyes steady. "Wendy, I'm here. You're not alone in this, okay? We'll figure it out. We'll take this head on, together." Wendy nodded, feeling the warmth of his words, but doubt lingered. Aaron wasn't the type to let go quietly. He had always been manipulative, always found ways to exert control, and he wouldn't stop until he had a firm hold over her again. She didn't know how, but she could feel it. He was plotting, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was only a few days later that Wendy received the third email. This time the threat was personal, an explicit message that made her blood run cold. "You think you've won, Wendy? You're nothing without me. Everything you've built is mine, and I'll make sure you lose it all." The email was followed by a picture of her office taken from outside the building. It was a warning, a declaration that she was still within his reach. Wendy knew that Aaron had resources, connections she had never been fully aware of, and those connections could make her life miserable in an instant. The idea of losing everything, after all the hard work she had done to rebuild, made her stomach churn with fear. Wendy didn't waste any time. She contacted her lawyer and her security team, determined to take every precaution necessary to protect herself and the life she had worked so hard to create. She knew that this battle wasn't just about her safety. It was about keeping everything she had fought for from being torn apart by someone who couldn't accept defeat. The divorce had been the first step, but the real war had just begun. Aaron wasn't going to let her go without a fight, and Wendy wasn't going to let him destroy her. As the weeks passed, the threats grew bolder. The emails were no longer anonymous but signed with Aaron's name, his words dripping with contempt. He threatened to leak private documents, ruin her reputation, and sabotage the foundation she had worked so hard to build. He knew about the charitable partnerships she was securing, the deals she had made, and he was willing to stop at nothing to destroy her. Each threat made Wendy more determined, more resolute in her decision to fight back. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the legacy she was building, for the women and children whose lives she was changing through her work. One evening, as Wendy sat in her office going over a new proposal, she received a call that sent her heart racing. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but the message was clear. "Aaron's not done with you," the man said, his voice low, almost whispering. "He's got people watching you. You don't know it, but you're being followed. He's making moves behind the scenes, and he's coming for you." The phone call ended abruptly, leaving Wendy with a cold dread spreading through her chest. She wasn't sure who this man was or what his intentions were, but it was enough to confirm her worst fear. Aaron wasn't finished. He was playing a long game, and he was going to use everything at his disposal to ruin her. That night, Wendy made a decision. She wasn't going to hide. She wasn't going to let Aaron dictate her life any longer. She reached out to her contacts, her allies, and started to build a network of protection. She wasn't just going to be on the defense. She was going to go on the offensive. Wendy would not be intimidated. She would take control of her narrative, and if Aaron thought he could scare her into submission, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. The game had changed, and now it was time for her to take the reins. But as Wendy prepared to face the coming storm, she couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Aaron's revenge wasn't over, not by a long shot. The battle for her future, for her freedom, was just beginning, and Wendy was determined to come out on top. Wendy's life had taken a turn she never thought possible, and as she stood in the quiet stillness of her apartment, she could finally breathe. The past year had been filled with turmoil, with moments of deep sadness, but also of incredible strength. She had fought to rebuild everything she once thought was lost, to reclaim the woman she had once been. And now, standing at the threshold of a new beginning, she realized that it was all worth it. Her days were no longer filled with anxiety and fear of Aaron's revenge. Instead, they were filled with purpose, with the work she had always wanted to do, the kind of work that could change lives, that could truly make a difference. Her job at the foundation was going better than ever. The programs she had spearheaded were thriving, expanding in ways she never imagined, and each success brought her closer to the woman she had always known she could be. She was no longer defined by her past, by the man who had tried to break her, but by her strength and the legacy she was building. As she moved through her days, meeting with donors, traveling to schools, and meeting new people who shared her vision, Wendy knew she was making an impact. She had finally found her calling, and in doing so, she had found herself again. Peter had been her rock throughout this journey, a steady presence who believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. Their friendship had deepened over time, but Wendy had never expected to find the kind of love she had now. It had blossomed slowly, quietly, with the same patience Peter had shown her during the most difficult moments of her life. His support had been unwavering, but it was his quiet, steady presence that had made her realize that love didn't have to be complicated or dramatic. Love could be simple, genuine, and built on mutual respect and admiration. One evening, as they sat in her living room, talking about the latest success of the Foundation's work, Peter turned to her, his face soft with something she hadn't quite recognized until now. "Wendy," he said, his voice low, "I've been thinking about us, about everything we've been through together, and I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for the long haul." Wendy's heart skipped a beat, and for the first time, she saw it clearly. The love that had been there all along, subtle but undeniable. "Peter," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "I never thought I'd be here, with you like this. After everything, I thought love was something I'd never find again. But you've shown me that it's not just possible, it's real." Peter smiled, his eyes meeting hers with a depth of feeling that made her heart swell. "We've both been through so much, Wendy, and through it all, we've come out stronger. Together, we can face whatever comes next." Wendy felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling that she had never known before. Peace. She had always been afraid of what the future might hold, afraid of trusting someone again after everything that had happened with Aaron. But with Peter, everything felt right. She wasn't walking through life alone anymore. She had someone who understood her, who saw her for the person she was now. Not the broken woman who had been manipulated, but the woman who had rebuilt herself, piece by piece, from the ashes. In the months that followed, their relationship deepened further. It wasn't just about love. It was about shared values, shared goals, and the understanding that they both had things to offer that the other needed. They traveled together, laughed together, and faced life's challenges side by side. For the first time in a long time, Wendy felt complete. She had found not just a partner in Peter, but a friend, a confidant, someone who knew the parts of her that no one else could see, and who loved her despite and because of those parts. As their relationship grew stronger, so did Wendy's sense of self. She realized that despite everything Aaron had put her through, she had never lost the essence of who she was. She had simply been buried under the weight of someone else's cruelty, someone else's expectations. Now that weight had been lifted, and Wendy was free to live her life on her terms. One afternoon, as they sat in a cafe overlooking the city, Wendy couldn't help but feel a deep sense of contentment. She had done it. She had rebuilt her life, rebuilt her identity, and had found a love that was steady and true. The road had been long, but it had led her to this moment, this quiet, beautiful moment where she knew she had finally come home. "Peter," she said, her voice filled with conviction, "I never thought I'd get to this place, but now I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He smiled at her, reaching across the table to take her hand in his. "I know you've been through a lot, Wendy, and I'll always be here to support you. But what I admire most about you is your strength. You've always known who you are, even when you couldn't see it. And now, you're living that truth every single day." Wendy squeezed his hand, feeling the truth of his words deep in her heart. She had always known who she was, but it had taken her a long time to truly believe it. Now she did. As the days passed, Wendy continued to pour herself into her work, but she also learned to savor the moments of peace, of joy that life had to offer. She traveled with Peter, taking vacations to places she had always dreamed of visiting, and together they explored new horizons. They didn't rush through life. They lived it fully and completely, in a way that felt right, in a way that felt true. But even as her happiness grew, Wendy never forgot the lessons of the past. She knew that life would always have its challenges, but she also knew that she had the strength to face them. She had overcome the worst, and now she was living a life of love, fulfillment, and peace. She was no longer the woman who had been broken by betrayal. She was the woman who had risen from the ashes, stronger and more determined than ever before. Wendy's happiness wasn't just a new chapter in her life. It was the culmination of everything she had fought for, everything she had believed in, and everything she had become. And as she looked ahead, she knew that the future held more than she could ever have imagined. And for the first time, she was ready to embrace it with open arms. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Wendy's story of strength, resilience, and new beginnings. We hope her transformation inspires you as much as it has inspired us. What did you think of the story? We'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections, so feel free to share your comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful narratives like this. Stay tuned for our next video, and thank you again for being a part of this experience. We can't wait to connect with you again soon.